we had no business being there. That does not take away the genius and the heroism of the men who were sent to fight for their country. I'll be right back.
Hi, it's Roger Hitchcock. Join me evenings starting at 7, right after Savage on Talk 910 KNEW.
Well, you know my feelings now about big pharmacy pushing their pills to answer every problem, particularly in our children. I wrote Healing Children Naturally, which has become, a perennial bestseller available only on michaelsavage.com. Don't just take my word for it. I'm only a PhD. Joining us today is Dr. Peter Breggin to talk about the increasing use of these so-called medications and the increasing profits being made at the expense of people, particularly children.
Michael, in 2008, the so-called antipsychotic drugs became America's best-selling class of medications with $14.6 billion in sales. These drugs include Risperdal, Zyprexa, Seroquel, Abilify, and Geodone. Medications used to control cholesterol were in second place. The use of these newer antipsychotics will continue to grow like a mushroom cloud over America. The FDA has recently approved Risperdal and Abilify for treating children with schizophrenia as young as age 13 and children with bipolar disorder as young as 10 years old. Furthermore, a recent FDA panel has recommended that the agency approve the other antipsychotics, Zyprexa, Seroquel, and Geodone, for children as young as age 10. It's absurd and potentially deadly to give these adult diagnoses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder to children. It stigmatizes the children for a lifetime while shortening that lifetime with toxic drugs. Children as young as age 1 are being put on these chemical toxins. It's ironic that the panel approved these drugs shortly after the Department of Justice fined Eli Lilly $1.4 billion for criminal activities in part by marketing Zyprexa to children.
What kind of studies are being done before these drugs are unleashed on our children? I am sure that most of our listeners think that there are dozens of studies that last for months or years before these saintly drug companies recommend them.
Michael, here's the total evidence demanded by the FDA panel for approving Geodone for children. One very marginal study that lasted 4 weeks. None of the studies went beyond 6 weeks.
One study from 4 to 6 weeks? That's not even enough time to know any real side effects or dangers to the children taking the drugs.
In fact, Michael, the worst and most deadly effects won't usually be detected for a few months or more, sometimes for years. For example, tardive dyskinesia usually won't begin to show up before 3 months. Tardive dyskinesia is a movement disorder that disfigures and disables children and that afflicts young people taking these drugs at the astronomical rate of 5% per year or 15% or more in 3 years. Now, those figures are for young adults, and we don't have good studies on the rates in children. But I'm already seeing dozens of cases in kids, and the rates are probably at least as high in children as in young adults. Another disease is neuroleptic malignant syndrome. It's a potentially fatal disorder that looks very much like a viral inflammation of the brain, and it occurs in 1 to 2% or more of adults taking these drugs, once again with no good studies in children. These same antipsychotic drugs like Risperdal and Zyprexa also cause little boys and girls to develop breast tissue and even to lactate. And some horrendous cases cannot be corrected even after the drug is stopped and the child is given surgery on his chest. These drugs cause extreme obesity and elevated cholesterol. They cause diabetes and pancreatitis, and I've evaluated fatal cases in young people caused by the antipsychotic drugs. In adults, these drugs also dramatically shorten the lifespan, not only by causing fatal diseases, but also by causing such apathy and indifference that adults stop taking care of themselves. Animal studies show that the drugs are very toxic to cells throughout the body, including the brain, causing shrinkage of brain tissue and distortions in cell growth in the brain. I've documented all this in my recent medical book, Brain Disabling Treatments in Psychiatry.
How have you seen these drugs affect children?
The antipsychotic drugs like Risperdal, Zyprexa, Abilify, Geodon, and Seroquel cause severe impairment of the frontal lobes, the highest mental centers. They are literally chemical lobotomies. So the most obvious effect, similar to surgical lobotomy, is to make people emotionally sluggish and indifferent. They care less about everything, including themselves and other people. They care less about their opinions and their values or their higher ideals. That's how the drugs work, by causing apathy. Many people lose their independence when taking these drugs. Some become zombie-like.
And these drugs have become the most widely used in America according to sales? This is impossible.
Well, first, this means that the drug companies have done a lot of illegal promoting of these drugs to a much wider general population. They're being prescribed for everything from mild anxiety to mild insomnia. And most appalling to me, in children they are being used to control behavior. That is, to chemically lobotomize children who haven't been taught discipline by their parents and teachers, or who may be bored in school. It points to something terrible happening in America when so many people are willing to take these lobotomizing agents or to inflict them on children. I think it indicates a growing streak of helplessness and hopelessness in America, an unspoken undercurrent among our citizens that we're better off with less brain power, less intellect, less awareness, and less feeling. It's going to make it much easier in the political arena to turn Americans into a helpless group of dependents who rely on the state rather than on themselves. That brings me to my weekly refrain called the Primary Principles. Protect freedom. Take responsibility at all times. Express gratitude for all your gifts and opportunities. Become a source of love. You can listen to all my Savage Nation reports and download the transcripts on www.breggin.com. That's BREGGIN.com.
Thanks for the report, Dr. Breggin. Very, very chilling. Look, I'm not shocked by any of this. That's why I have pioneered trying to stop the use of Ritalin in children in my book, Healing Children Naturally, which I highly recommend. Okay? It's time you understood.
Michael Savage. Afternoons 3 to 7 on Talk 910 KNEW and online at 910KNEW.com.